All right, good afternoon. Let's get started if we could. Welcome to Front Row with the Faculty at St. Joseph's College. My name is Joanne Bean. I'm the Vice President and Chief Advancement Officer at the college. And it's my pleasure tonight to introduce to you a little bit about our speaker's talk and certainly our speaker himself. And thank you for joining us. I see a number of names that are recognized as both alumni, faculty, staff, and our contributors to the college, and we welcome you to this exciting series. So today being Veterans Day, and with our 2020 presidential election over, it is certainly time to reflect on civic engagement in our second Front Row with the Faculty series. And this afternoon, Dr. Dale Brooker is going to take some time to consider the fact that no matter what the outcome of the presidential election, no matter what the status of our pandemic, there continues to be a series of social problems that need to be collectively addressed. And Dale is going to examine this with us and the importance of civic engagement as a way to collaboratively address social problems at the local level so as to promote sustainable and just communities. And it's my distinct honor to introduce you Dr. Dale Brooker. He is the Director of Interdisciplinary Studies at St. Joseph's College, the Associate Professor of Criminal Justice, and the former Chair of the Department of Sociology, Criminal Justice, and Social Work at St. Joseph's College. He is the Project Director of Education for Sustainability through the Humanities, a national endowment of the Humanities grant awarded to the college in 2019. He is the author of numerous publications, an article focusing on community-based learning, civic engagement, and the importance of these in the lives of students and in the communities which they serve. So he has received numerous awards, and I would like to point them out because I think it'll reflect on why he's the most appropriate person to speak on this subject. He has received a Citizens Award for the City of Westbrook, the Instructional Innovation and Community-Based Learning Award recipient at St. Joseph's College. Also, Excellence in Teaching Award, a very important award at St. Joseph's College, both in 2007 and 2014. In the town of Westbrook, the city of Westbrook, he has served as the Public Safety Commissioner, the Human Relations Committee member, and most importantly, as a child and as a teenager, he witnessed and found himself regularly in a fire department in upstate New York, where his father served as a volunteer firefighter and eventually the chief of the fire department. His father also served on various church and town and community boards and committees, and Dale's exposure to this form of civic engagement has helped shape who he is today, how he seeks to serve others, and the ways in which he encourages our students to think about how they can serve their community. So Dale, it's really a pleasure to turn this over to you, and thank you for your time with us this afternoon.
Great, thanks, Joanne. Thanks everybody for taking some time this afternoon to sit and ponder and reflect on the importance of civic leadership in post-election times. The title of the presentation is morphed into civic leadership because we think that civic leadership is just a byproduct of civic engagement in so many ways. So we'll be talking a little bit about civic engagement, we'll talk about leadership, and we'll talk about what the challenges are that lie ahead for civic leaders. First of all, I'd like to take a moment to highlight the fact that today is Veterans Day. And in that spirit, I chose a quote from John McCain, which highlights really what we're all about. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank those who have served or have family members that have served. I'm grateful to have many people in my life that have served and are currently serving in our armed forces. So I thank those individuals in my own family, and I thank those people that have had folks that are in their lives or have been in their lives that have served our country. So thanks for that. The quote from John McCain really sums it up. This is a really great quote that he's well known for, and his engagement civically and in the public eye, and of course all his wonderful accomplishments in his military service. He states that civic participation over a lifetime working in neighborhoods and communities and service of all kinds, military and civilian, full and part-time, national and international, will strengthen America's civic purpose. And that's really where we are, the idea of strengthening America's civic purpose, because there are a number of factors that we'll talk about tonight that might impact our ability to actually serve civically. And we'll talk a little bit about what that is. I'll get into some sociological concepts that are relevant. But what this presentation and discussion does tonight is follow my own personal experience, where the seeds of civic engagement were planted, how they blossomed, how I've come to study it as a social scientist, how I apply it to my teaching, and an assessment of what challenges are ahead for those wanting to engage in civic leadership. So a big shout out obviously goes to my father, who is deceased. He passed away in 2015. Russell James Jim Brooker. He really couldn't stand his first name Russell, so everybody called him Jim. You can see him here. He was a member of the US Navy, and then subsequently was a member of the Houstonville Fire Department. It's a volunteer organization, a volunteer fire department back in upstate New York, right outside of Poughkeepsie, New York, right on the Hudson. My father served there from 1972 until the time he retired in 2007. When he retired, he came to Maine with my mom, and they lived with me until they both passed. So it was a, kind of full circle moment for the Brooker family, where, I leave home and they come back to my home eventually. So, so one of the things that I'd like for us to ponder is what these photos represent. What they represent is a sense of trust in people in our community, and people are military to do good deeds and to do the difficult deeds and to make the sacrifices necessary for folks. And that's really where I had found my calling, is in my father's demonstration of what it meant to be civically engaged. Not shown here are a whole host of other activities my father was engaged in, including work at our home church back in Wappingers Falls, New York, Zion Episcopal Church, one of the oldest churches in Dutchess County, New York, where he served on the vestry there and did a number of outreach activities in and around the community. He also worked for the county commissioners and worked in local politics, all the while having a family life, 3 children, and his amazing wife, Sandy, my mom. And he had to balance all of that. And that was the real tricky part. But he always felt it deep down inside that he needed to be civically engaged, continuously giving back to his community. And I bring up this point of trust because these folks looked trustworthy. They are trustworthy. These are the people that are going to come and save you from a car accident or extract you from that, which my father did. They might come to your home if you have a structure fire. They may be serving you a pancake breakfast on a Sunday morning so they can raise funds for a new engine, a new fire truck, because it was a volunteer company and they relied heavily on donations from the community. And that was a major part of how my father operated. In addition to that, and something I'll get into here in a moment, is the idea that my father did a lot of bowling that was associated with some of these groups. Now, you're probably kind of thinking, well, what does bowling have to do with civic engagement? But in Robert Putnam's book in 2000, it's titled Bowling Alone. And what Robert Putnam suggests, and I'll talk about Robert Putnam quite a bit tonight, what Robert Putnam talks about is the fact that we've built social capital out of those small teams of bowlers that would get together back in the 1960s and 70s. And that demonstrated the fact that we have, what I'll talk about later, is social capital, this idea that we have trust and that we are reciprocal in our relationships with one another. And we trust those people around us. We trust the people that we bowl with. But what's happened since the 1970s and 80s? Well, according to Robert Putnam and all the social science data, bowling leagues have gone down. They're still in existence, of course, but they've gone down. And that's a sign that people are perhaps leaning towards less civically engaged activities over the life course. That's not to suggest civically minded activities don't exist, but we'll talk a little bit about that too. So how did he chart a course for civic engagement? Well, social institutions that develop one's civic imagination of what could be are essential. And this is the key. And I'll talk about this later on in terms of what civic leaders might be able to do moving forward. But for me, it centers around these social institutions. And as a sociologist, and as a social scientist, and as a criminologist, these are the things that I I study, but I also, deep down inside, am that true sociologist where my own personal life identifies with the larger social life, what exists out there, what exists on the larger macro level. So my micro self is looking to the macro for an understanding of how one operates. And the family, like father, like son, is, as Joanne pointed out, and thank you for that introduction, Joanne, you know, I am doing really many of the things that my father did. I really am doing a variety of things in my civic life that my father did. I serve on, I serve in my church at St. Anne's Episcopal Church here in Windham. I serve on the vestry. I work with the outreach committee dealing with food insecurity issues. My father was involved in some nonprofit work. I'm regularly working with Mark Swan with Preble Street. We're trying to figure out how advocacy operates there and what that looks like. As Joanne mentioned, I was a public safety commissioner for the city of Westbrook, where we oversaw the hiring and the promotion process for folks that were in the public safety department and the communications department. Also, workplaces. The St. Joseph's College community is a place for civic imagination to take place. And that's something that I hold near and dear, because without my connection with St. Joseph's College, I probably wouldn't be able to do some of the great things that I'm able to do, not only here on campus, but in the community as well. And then, of course, education. The St. Joseph's College experience for our students involves community-based learning projects, civic engaged projects where students are going out and assisting public agencies, institutions, and organizations on a regular basis so that they can meet their learning outcomes for that course. And there have been some great instances of that. I caution people, though, when we talk about the SJC experience, because those are episodic moments of service that are maybe part of one course. And what we try to encourage is we try to encourage students to think, what is life going to be like once I leave St. Joseph's College? How am I going to give back to the community? Because one of our core values obviously focuses in on community, and we need to take that and shape that as we go. Just like my father kind of shaped that notion with me. So whether or not my students realize it on a daily basis, they are, being taught by my father, a byproduct of my father's experiences with me as a child. So some concepts for consideration tonight, and I know I have 20 minutes, so I want to make sure I keep focused on that. Social cohesion is the ability of neighbors to coexist and work well together as a collective unit. That's something that we strive for here at St. Joseph's College. That's something I strive for. I was shown how to strive for that. My father knew everybody in the neighborhood. Everybody knew him. And, it's really evident at his funeral when all these people are coming up and, the place is packed, and you really see that even though he's been away from, New York State for 6 or 7 years because he moved to Maine, these people know him and they've known of him and they've been impacted by him in some way, shape, or form. Collective efficacy is the collective sense of being able to accomplish a specific task together. This is the real challenge, I think, in our current social and political climate. The sense of being able to accomplish specific tasks together, because we are so threatened by this pandemic. We are divisive in some of our political views, and that poses a real threat to our collective sense of being. So I go back to those social institutions where we do find those collective senses of being, where people of all political persuasions can come together and work together collectively to deal with a problem that we have mutually identified as being difficult to solve in our community, which leads me to social control, which is the ability of neighbors to work together to prevent and help solve problems within their communities. Back in my father's day, the informal social control mechanism of my father yelling at kids down the street to stop speeding up and down the road was effective enough to get them to stop. Obviously, they had some choice words, but eventually, they knew who he was, they stopped. In this day and age, we tend to rely on more formal organizations of social control, like the police, to come in and solve community problems, instead of relying on the community themselves to figure out informal mechanisms to control the behaviors of those people within. Social capital. Something that's influenced me significantly is the study of social capital ever since my dissertation back at Sam Houston State University. This has to do with the connections amongst individuals, social networks, and the norms of reciprocity and trustworthiness that arise from them. Now, I applied social capital to people that were incarcerated and then were subsequently going back into the community after they had been incarcerated. That's called the reentry process. And that's where my subject matter expertise lies. And my point was to figure out how family support mechanisms played a role in how they were going to be able to integrate back into the community and what that looked like. How were their family members going to establish reciprocal relationships and get them to identify as being trustworthy once again after they've been labeled an inmate, an ex-felon, whatever it was. So social capital played a significant role in whether or not they were going to be successful once they returned to their various communities. So what is the importance of social capital? I've talked a little bit about it. And again, the key elements of social capital involved honesty and reciprocity and trust. Honesty, reciprocity, and trust. These are really the key elements of social capital. And as Robert Putnam highlighted in his book, this calls to attention the fact that civic virtue is most powerful when it's embedded in a sense of network of reciprocal social relations. So if you think of our college community as that network of reciprocal social relations, we are constantly connecting with folks in our community, whether they live close by, whether they're in Standish, whether in their greater Portland area, to establish those reciprocal social relationships. How can we use our time, our treasure, and our talent to make a better community that is sustainable over time? What does that look like? And it has to do with these reciprocal social relationships. Think about the reciprocal social relationships you have in your own community. Do you have them with your neighbors? For me, the reciprocal social relationships really focus here at St. Joseph's College, where this is really like a family to me. They are embedded in friends that I have at my church. They are embedded with friends that I've met throughout the course of working here and subsequently going on as former students. These reciprocal social relationships exist. Sometimes they're maybe more one-sided than others, but if you rely on someone, you know that you can call on them for a favor. If they need something, you know that they're there for you. And the idea is that a society characterized by this general reciprocity is more efficient than a distrustful society. So Putnam is alluding to the fact at the macro level, the more trusting a society is, the more efficient it's going to be in the ability to solve and address social problems. And civic engagement and social capital really involve this mutual obligation and responsibility for action. This is the civic virtue element of it all. And again, it's important to ask how the positive consequences of social capital, like mutual support, cooperation, trust, and institutional effectiveness, can be maximized, because there are negative sides to social capital. When people are coming together in reciprocal social relationships, that can result in negative consequences: sectarianism, ethnocentrism, corruption, distrust of one another, distrust of our democratic process. So what does social science tell us? Well, economists have long recognized that trusting communities have measurable economic advantages. The people within those communities where trust is high and reciprocity is high and honesty is high do better than other communities. And if you've ever read The Lobster Coast, you'll understand that there is an ethos here in Maine that really talks about having these trusting communities up and down the coast of Maine, up in the county, right? There are these trusting relationships that have flourished over time. And it's not just about the lobster economy, obviously. There are other economies here in Maine, but there is this ethos here in Maine where there are some significant numbers of trusting communities. Now, public health researchers suggest that we have a strong correlation between living in trustful communities and enhanced life expectancy. And that's critical as well. If you're able to rely on your neighbor to come over or go to Walgreens for you because you trust them to go and do it, and that they're there for you on a consistent and regular basis, that's going to improve the health and well-being of those people within. It's also going to be helpful in the sense that we're checking on the well-being of others. And that's something that we're attempting to recreate in a very kind of small and meaningful way here at St. Joseph's College with our Institute for Integrative Aging. That is a community outreach mechanism where we're trying to build trust and we're trying to build community. And that's really the essence of what we do here at the college. But again, We also know that there are some significant public health benefits to those people that are participating in those programs. Criminologists, like myself, note that when trust in communities are strong, there's less reliance on those formal mechanisms of social control, the criminal justice system, and more reliance on collective efficacy and informal social control measures like my father yelling at those kids going fast down the street. And political philosophers and scientists argue that communities trusting in a fair and democratic process by way of voting decreases polarization and reinforces the ethos of a democratic citizenship. Very critical in this post-election time, right? Communities that are trusting in fair and democratic process. This is something that is yet to be really measured and examined given our current context of our post-election here in the United States in 2020. And there's a lot more to uncover and unravel with that. However, that being said, at a community level, and let's not look at the national level, but let's look at the community level. It's noted by the Public Religion Research Institute, at least back in 2018, that a majority of Americans say that they're optimistic that peoples in their communities who hold different political views can still come together and solve the country's problem, while less than half say they disagree. I think if we broke it down by region or state, again, there is an ethos here in Maine, at least, that there is some independence and there is some melding of independent political factions that can come together and solve those problems, given the context of our national representation in the US Congress, for example. So, being mindful of time, I think I'm doing pretty good, Joanne. Civic engagement, social capital, and the importance of civic leadership, right? Let's get to where we were headed, right? No matter who's been or who will be elected the US president, either now or later on, or 4 years from now, or 8 years from now, or 12 years from now, there will always be various spheres of our social life that will need people in the community to come together and work collectively to address a variety of social problems and issues. There's no doubt about it. So what's the key role for civic leaders moving forward? And then what's the challenge for civic leaders? This is the real question and the real quagmire in my mind in many instances about this polarization. But the key role is to spark the civic imaginations of our fellow citizens to really discover and invent new ways of connecting socially that fit our changed lives. During the pandemic, post-pandemic, perhaps a different pandemic moving forward, post-election, future presidencies, whatever it is, our lives are going to change and the social problems that are part of our communities are still there. There are still people here in Windham that are food insecure. It doesn't matter who the president of the United States is going to be. There will still be people that are insecure in terms of being able to access food. There will be people that are in need of healthcare. There will be affordable medicine. There will still be people in need out there. And the question is, how do we address it? But more so, how do we come up with new and innovative ways to do that, given the set of circumstances that we're faced with? And the big challenge is, how do you unify communities? How do you encourage mutual support, cooperation, and trust? For me, I've seen it. I've seen a heterogeneous community come together in and around various activities where I grew up, folks from all over. But additionally, moving folks from this episodic service, going and volunteering one time, to a more meaningful experience that's woven into the fabric of social life, woven into our arts and culture, woven into our institutions of higher education, high schools, woven into our religious affiliations, woven into our workplaces. How is that woven in? And again, I think for me, at least, what I see is that we do have that here, at least in my workplace. And that's part of the reason I chose to come here 16 years ago, is because I could see that it was woven at least into the workplace life here at the college, that we are encouraging mutual support, cooperation, and trust. And then we're subsequently giving that to our students to go out and give to their communities later on. And at the same time, we're using the opportunity with our community partners to bring them in and be part of that experience so that they can connect and identify ways to go out and make the world a better place. Sure. But moreover, here's the important part. According to Putnam's new book, The Upswing, there's accelerating inequality, political polarization, vitriolic public discourse, and private and public narcissism to contend with. Putnam's new thesis is that we have gone from a we generation to an I generation. And I think of that picture of my father in his US Navy uniform, and I think of the we generation as he was, working in the Philadelphia Naval Hospital during the Korean War. I think about the we generation. And I think there is, and I agree with some of what Putnam is saying, that we are moving more towards an I generation. How do we get back to that, we generation? What does that look like? And there are some great positive trends. There are some great movements taking place that indicates that. But movements are one thing. Social movements are one thing. The real work gets done by you and I as, engaged in civic life and, giving that to our children. And, that brings me up to another point. Both of my children, they're twins and they're both in college right now, but something that they've always had alongside that is the fact that they've always continued to be mindful of, their civic duties, giving back to their communities, whether it's the college that they go to and giving back to that college community and where they go to school, or giving to that local community where their college is located, or going back home and giving to folks in and around that home, or to their church, whatever it is. It's always that sense of, attempting to give back. And, sometimes, life gets in the way, obviously, right? And we know that that's the case. And that's another challenge. We're consumed with so many other things that we're having to deal with in this 21st century. Let alone a pandemic and some civil unrest and political unrest. So that's the real challenge for civic leaders moving forward. Now, this wouldn't be a presentation and a discussion if I didn't hear from folks that are here on the Zoom call, Zoom meeting with us this evening. And some questions for us to consider tonight, and I open it up for discussion, but I'd really like to get a sense, because I'm inquisitive and I'm a social scientist, and I'm always trying to uncover what other people are thinking and doing and feeling. Do you believe there's a sense of honesty, respect, trust, and reciprocity in your local community? Why or why not? Maybe you've seen that wax and wane over the years. I don't know. Are there examples you might share that highlight how you personally have engaged in civic life? And then what issues or social problems are on your mind right now? I can probably guess that the pandemic is one of them. And how do you see yourself civically engaged moving forward? These are some questions for us to ponder either tonight, down the road, wherever we'd like to go. So I'm going to leave it open to you because my mouth is dry and I'm going to get a drink of water, but I'd love to hear from you all and hear where you think you're giving back and how you're giving back and what that looks like.
So the floor is open. Turn off your microphones, please, and you can address Dale in that fashion by just speaking. If you want to put a question in the chat box, do that as well. So who wants to get started?
Well, I'll start by just saying that I don't know in my local community necessarily, because I just moved to the town of Windham from Westbrook, and I'm still feeling out the town of Windham. While I know quite a bit about it, I know Bill Diamond really well, and we've had long conversations about what Windham's about. I have yet to really kind of get a lay of the land. And that's what I like to do before I get civically engaged with local governments or communities to figure that out. But one of the things I encourage among students is to, I try to get them to identify a committee that they might be on in their town or city when they go back. For me, it was easy. I just, you look at the Westbrook, or Windham website, and there are a bunch of committees that are always in need of volunteers. And that's one great way of attempting to serve. So I try to get students to think about how they can do that above and beyond kind of what they're engaged in. And that's always been a helpful way of introducing them at least to the potential of civic duty, because many times our on-campus traditional students are kind of focused on getting that degree and getting that first job. But, I try to get them to think ahead of time, ahead of that, and figure out what they're going to be doing, post-graduation. So.
Hey Dale, it's Oliver. I wanted to ask a question, sort of probe the idea of kind of a generational movement from we to me, um, and and sort of propose maybe another idea that is generational but might not be specifically so. It feels to me, based on looking at Gen Z levels of volunteerism and their expectation that everybody will allow them to volunteer as much as possible. Like they're pretty committed to their communities in a lot of ways, although it might look different. But I wonder if the social media piece has exacerbated a divide between how we see ourselves as part of a community locally versus globally, and whether the less intimate our our actions are, the less we can see the effect, the less the less citizenship we feel in a way, so that we are good citizens locally, and exacerbated by social media, we might not be as good citizens on a larger scale. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I guess, Oliver, that's a great question. I guess the question is, what do we define as a good citizen, right? First and foremost. And then secondly, I think it's a double-edged sword, right? Social media. And it's interesting because Putnam is addressing some of that. He addressed it in 2000 when, all the social media that we have now was kind of a lot of it was in its infancy, right? And since then, he's really talking about this kind of social media divide and how it is a double-edged sword. While it has the potential for bringing people together, it does so in a way that creates a level of distrust because people might not be able to see that person in person, and they may be communicating with them and trusting that they're communicating with who they think they're communicating with, which is a whole nother story. But the idea of bowling alone, right? The idea of going to a bowling alley and developing social capital there has been somewhat replaced with creating a Facebook group or something else. So I think the research, the real ripe research that would be interesting to see in this generation, especially, since my kids were both born in 2000, it makes me wonder how they're impacted in terms of their concept of mutual obligation to one another in a physical space versus in a social media space, and what that entails. I'm not sure I'm answering your question fully, but the generational thing is certainly something that Putnam is really trying to tease out to the we and I. And he does suggest in his book, The Upswing, that social media is distracting to this sense of mutual obligation and productivity on a civic level.
Yeah.
Although it's a great way to connect, right? I mean,
yeah.
It's a wonderful way to connect. It's just whether or not that connection yields a solution to a problem.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think we're every day we're learning more, right? We're on a Zoom call right now, whereas we hopefully would, produce this in, in our auditorium. However, this is where we are, and I'm seeing people, or I'm just seeing their name, which is fine too. And, it's giving us a different way of connecting than we would at a town hall or at a square dance or at a barn dance back in the day. We used to go to those, or at the firehouse. I spent a lot of time at the firehouse when I was a kid. So we're not making those connections. And, even church is a challenge too for many of us, or other religious services are a challenge for us to get to. It doesn't feel the same. And how are we adapting to that? What does that look like? How does that affect our ability to engage in civic life? And this pandemic has really put a strain on some of that.
Hello, Dale. This is Ken.
Hi, Ken.
How are you, sir? Thank you for giving us your time.
Sure.
I've certainly spent a lot of years running pancake breakfasts and golf tournaments, and I know the feeling. But my concern, and again, I'm more kind of an on the street kind of guy. We used to give money to the police department cash, And if they saw somebody out, you know, didn't have sneakers, didn't have a coat in the winter, whatever, they would just be able to take that cash and buy the kid a coat or whatever. And there was no questions asked. And also just get tons of food, literally tons, and distribute it to the needy. And that's actually in our area because we would go to the school nurse, and the school nurse knows where the problems lie, right? She's not allowed to tell us where the problems lie. So it's almost as if the community, right? And I don't know if this is right or wrong, but it's very difficult to be part of the community because like the laws have made it difficult for the average person to say, boy, that person needs help. And, you know, we've raised this money and I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but we seem so disconnected. And I'm very concerned because much of my success comes from having joined these civic organizations when I was young out of college and being around guys who are now retiring or have retired, and now I'm heading there, but there's no young people around me for me to say, hey, this works. It's like the whole world's become disconnected in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an over-reliance, Ken, sometimes on formal organizations to kind of create the energy necessary. That doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, formal organizations are bad, but I think it's a matter of, you know, some people want to, you know, it's a matter of time, treasure, and talent. And for some people, treasure is all that they have at their disposal at the moment to give to other people. Whereas, you know, while I have an active life and an active family life and all these other things, I do have the time and make the time for civic life. And that's a big responsibility. And I think that generationally speaking, I hear this all the time from my daughter. I'm busy, busy, busy. I'm busy, busy, busy. And that in and of itself, the busyness of social life, work life, takes away or detracts from our ability to figure out where we can prioritize civic life. And I think that becomes a real challenge. In addition to that, I'm not sure civic leaders are always good at identifying the talent that exists in their communities. What do other people have that they can bring to the community? Now, for me, that's part of what I do. I try to reach out to folks and identify the talents that are out there and the knowledge that's out there to bring it to the classroom for students, or to bring in guest lecturers, or have them work with, you know, local agencies and organizations to help them. And that's something that, you know, I do on a regular basis, but that's part of how I operate and part of what I do for a living. So that blends in nicely for me. So I'm not sure I answered your question, Ken, but I think it's an important one to bring up about, you know, how do we become involved? Where is that money that we're giving going? And where is it that people in the future are going to go? I mean, how do we look at the civically engaged moving forward? And we set them up here at St. Joseph's College for that success. And we have a lot of great students that go out and do great things and are engaged. And I think it's become a little different over time. And it's up to you know, institutions to help support and encourage opportunities out there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other thoughts? Lots of questions to consider. Does anyone want to share something about themselves? It's always a good idea.
Hi, Dale. I'm happy to share a little bit about myself.
Hey, Stephanie.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good.
Good.
So when I was younger, I found that I was pretty much involved in everything you could possibly be involved in civic life. I had an active, I was very active in our church, you know, helped in the daycare of the church, helped, you know, prepare the youth ministry and go collect for UNICEF and do the food, you know, cabinet and visit with elderly and, you know, you name it, it was out there. I did it. And then as I got older, I found that it wasn't that I didn't have the time to do it, that I just didn't have the people around me that had the time and wanted to put the time in with me. And I'm a person who, if you say, hey, let's go, sing for Christmas carols to somebody, even though I might not sound very good, I'll go with them. But I'm more of somebody who has to do it with somebody else. So how do you get back into that community of people who have the same type of civic passion that you have?
That's a great question. You seek them out, and that's it. I find it's interesting you bring that up, Stephanie, because so many of the people that I'm civically engaged with are so much older than I am. And I find that many folks are retired, they have some time on their hands, et cetera. But I find that maybe it goes back to Oliver's point about the generational thing, about making the commitment to want to work together collectively. You also have to, I think it's also maybe a byproduct of our culture, we're so used to being able to pick and choose whatever product we want. We're so able to kind of pick and choose whatever service we want. Things are readily available, but we can't always kind of pick and choose the people we have to work with or collaborate with on something that's really important. I give an example of the fact that I was asked by the Episcopal Diocese of Maine to be part of their discernment committee for the next Bishop of Maine. And, Episcopalians are great. They're wonderful people. We're part of a religious community, but I'll tell you what, we didn't always see eye to eye. And there were times where a lot of folks were like, I don't want to do this. This is something I'm not comfortable engaging in. I don't want to collaborate with these people, but I think it takes strong leadership. And ironically, one of those leaders on that discernment committee is an adjunct faculty member here at St. Joseph's College, John Balicki. And John, as a civic leader, does an amazing job at bringing people together, creating that mutual support, and getting that trust moving with folks about what it is we need to do. And I think sometimes, we have to make compromises in terms of the people that we're working with and say, I may not like their style, but I also know that there's a greater purpose in terms of where we're headed with this. And I think that becomes somewhat of a challenge. And sometimes people, don't want to be involved. But I think what helps is identifying a cohesive group of people that can be consistent, because that's really it. It's a matter of consistency. How do you remain consistent with that group? What is that leader doing to promote consistency in terms of group interaction and connection and commitment? And I think that becomes a real challenge for folks. You get in, you want to do good things, and then you're kind of confronted with, oh boy, this may not be what I signed up for. So how do you work through that as an individual, and how far are you willing to go, to make that thing happen for that community? And that's a real challenge. And going back to the Public Safety Commission, I'll tell you what, I did not see eye to eye with a lot of my fellow commissioners when they were, suggesting who to hire. I didn't agree with the police chief at times, Bill Baker. A lot of times we saw eye to eye, but I will say that we had some, real interesting conversations about things. I mean, I liked him. I like everybody in general. So, I'm pretty good like that, but it's challenging, especially when people don't want to do the work that they've signed up for. That's another thing, especially in civic life where a lot of it's volunteer, and, you're volunteering. Are you putting your best foot forward? And then I think that becomes the real challenge for a lot of folks. But again, I think it has to do with what's the greater purpose. So, we have to put our differences aside to seek out that greater purpose. And I think people sometimes are more challenged with that than other people. And I respect that completely, that people have that challenge in front of them. So, but thanks for bringing it up, Stephanie. I mean, are there times where you've just been totally disgusted with the way things happen and you had to back out? Is that the case?
No, I don't think it's that. I think it's just getting back in maybe a habit of doing
Yeah.
the things
Yeah.
that I did for so many years.
Yeah.
You know, I still do a lot of stuff, like I'm on the Alumni Association board and I volunteer for other things, and you know, I'm part of a book club. So I do a lot of different things, but I feel like I'm still lacking in something.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of getting that motivation to do more and to fit it back into my life. And I've always found that I was motivated by other people who are like, hey, let's go do this. And then once I start doing it, I love it. You know, on Beth Augur's Day every year, we go somewhere, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and that always sparks it in me. And I'm always like, yes, I'm going to continue doing this. And then the next thing I know,
Yeah.
you know, the
Yeah.
next Beth Augur Day comes and I haven't done any service that I wanted to do. So I think it's just as your life changes and the people you hang out with. I mean, I don't live in the town that I lived in growing up. This community I live in is a little different than my home community. I knew everybody in my community. Here I don't. And I was part of a congregational church, which a lot of that is all about congregating, being together, whether it's, you know, serving suppers together or working in the food pantry, you know, or youth ministry or working side by side with the Catholic church to do Sunday sermons and things like that. That was part of who the congregational church was. And around where I live, it's about a half hour to the closest congregational church. And I think I keep saying maybe I should go back. But then I'm like, oh, that's an hour, you know, added on to the day. And, you know, so just trying to figure out how you motivate yourself to seek that fulfillment that you know you need, but you can't find the time for.
That's a great question. I think it speaks to so many of the challenges that we face and that civic leaders face. How do you get someone to commit to doing something civically when that person is so busy trying to make ends meet sometimes? I'm just saying in general, you know, how do you get people to do this when they have one job and they have a side hustle and they're just struggling to kind of, you know, stay afloat? And right now I'm dealing with the pandemic. I'm dealing with pandemic fatigue. I'm worn out from all of the political polarization, for example. I'm not happy about where our country's headed, whatever. And civic leaders have to be able to respond to that. Maybe it's finding a way just to, you know, give in small increments. What does that look like? Can you spend an hour here? Can you spend an hour there? And then personally reflecting. And to be honest, I'm in the same boat. I'm in a bit of a situation now where I've peeled back a little bit from my civic life, but I feel as though I'm being called to be more active in my church and on a greater level. So, you know, I'm listening to other things. I'm, you know, thinking about having a conversation with the bishop and, you know, talking about those things because I'm sensing it, because I'm hypersensitive to it, because my father, right, instilled that in me and said, you need to kind of listen to where you're at. I mean, his heart was always at that fire department. Always. I mean, you saw him. He's like 75, dressed in his, you know. It's still in my closet. I still have his dress uniform. It will never go anywhere. It's going to stay in my closet. My son will take it. I don't know, but you know, because I had that intuition. Now, back to that point, though, to Stephanie. One of the things that I didn't highlight, and I think we may have a psychologist on our Zoom call this evening, but there's a psychological component to this that I didn't really even get to because I'm not necessarily a behavioral scientist. But having social capital and having these mutual relationships and these mutual obligations and these reciprocal relationships does something for the psyche, and it does something for one's self-esteem, and it does something for one's, you know, health. It's healthy to be involved. And one of the things I was happened across a TED Talk the other day, and there's a study at BYU not too long ago. The number one factor that they examined that had to do with how long you live or life expectancy really was about social integration. The more you're socially integrated, the more you're involved with people, the better it is for your health, your self-esteem, you feel better, you have more energy, you're on point more. How socially integrated are you? that says a lot about the healthy lifestyle that you're leading, not only physically, but obviously emotionally as well. Obviously, there's times to disconnect, and sometimes we need to disconnect, sure, but there are some significant psychological benefits to civic engagement that get underscored many times. And that has to be balanced with some of the stressors that exist right now. And I think that's something that civic leaders are having a problem with in this pandemic. I know I had a brief exchange with Mark Swan at Preble Street. He was talking about, some of the challenges that they've had, obviously. And yeah, it's ongoing. How do you reignite volunteers when they're concerned about their own health and safety going out and volunteering elsewhere? So that's been a real challenge. The good news is, this is temporary. And when we were, coming to a kind of a tipping point where we can get back on track, hopefully, and we can kind of move forward. So stand by, Stephanie. That's what my suggestion. That's what I'm doing. I'm kind of like waiting for that moment that, and again, I think it's important to identify opportunities when they come your way. So to figure out how you fit into social life and civic duty, because there are some people out there that are in real need of folks and leaders and volunteers. And but again, I think it goes back to what Putnam says. It has to be regular in order for it to really kind of build up for folks. So I have a kind of a 4-year plan, where I'll engage for 4 years in that civic, duty, for like the Westbrook Commission or whatever. I try to give a term limit to myself, as to, I can only serve this long. That way I have a beginning and an end. Same thing with my church. Thankfully, there are at church, when I served on the vestry, as senior warden, there's a time frame. I go from this to that. And what helps, Stephanie, too, I don't know if this fits, but it helped that my wife was able to be on the vestry with me at the same time. So I had a partner in my civic life who was my partner at home, which helped. So one of the things that we know about civic duty is that when it's done in the family together as a collective, that enhances the longevity of it, because it's woven into your family life. It's not just one person doing it in the home. It's a commitment by the family to do it. And obviously that's sometimes very difficult, but I think it can be done in some instances. Thanks for sharing. Other thoughts? 4:55.
Hey, Dale, I have a question for you.
Hi, Nina.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. I have a question. So has Putnam talked about anything, looked at any research cross-culturally? I come from India, which tends to have both individualistic and collectivist traits. And the United States, when you look at it, is a very individualist society where they mostly prioritize themselves over group activities. So is there any research looking at it cross-culturally? That would be really interesting to discuss.
It sounds like we have a research agenda, Nina. Putnam does not get into it, but there are a lot of people that do assessments of civic life. And for example, I was just rereading Howard Gardner's 5 Minds for the Future. And in that, one of the things that he talks about are certain cultures in Italy that have this kind of cohesiveness, that civic life is such that they're able to kind of maintain this enclave where everybody is like incredibly happy and focused on the betterment of their daily and civic lives through the local government there. And so there is some research out there and again, it's a great, Putnam does not necessarily address it, but there is research out there. So, like Gardner highlights some of that in his work, but yeah, there is some cross-cultural work, and, it's out there, and, it'd be great to kind of identify that. Not only that, but what's always interesting for me, at least, because I grew up in an area where there were a lot of immigrants, and and a lot of different types of groups in and around the upstate New York area where I grew up. But a lot of immigrants that come over, what are they bringing over here as what their civic life is, and how does that look? what does it look like to them as, you know, new citizens. And, you know, I think that would be a great, I think you and I have some work ahead of us, Nina, because that sounds like a great project for us.
It does. Thank you, Dale.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just think about the new, it's interesting because there's a new police officer in the Portland Police Department. He's from Serbia. He basically got sworn in as a citizen and automatically, you know, he had already gone through the process to become a police officer, and, you know, there he is. And it's interesting to get his take on what civic duty is and what that looks like in the context of where he comes from. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. We've got to have one more. There's like 2 minutes left. And
Dale, what are you hearing from the folks who graduated from St. Joseph's College who were lucky enough to be in your coursework and to kind of launch a career in the criminal justice system?
It's just amazing. I was down in Washington, D.C. a couple years ago, and probably about two years ago. And just a real quick story. My wife took me down for a surprise, getaway or whatever. And we get a knock on the hotel door, and it's a former student, Ahmed. And Ahmed is a Detroit Metro police officer. And we went out for a steak dinner. Our Uber was a patrol car, by the way. But he's heavily involved because he's in the military, but he's also volunteering with young people, and he's engaged, and he's a police officer, and he just doesn't seem to kind of like stop. He kind of wants to do it all, and he's a really great example of giving back. He played lacrosse. He was heavily involved there. There are a lot of other alums that are out there that are actively involved in a variety of activities where they take their civic engagement experiences and transform them, because now they have the skill set to develop a project or work with an agency. And I think back to Stephanie's point, I think we set our students up for success in terms of their civic life because we break down that barrier of how do I access an agency or an organization, and we send them out. We don't, for me at least, I have them make contact. I'll give them the information, but they need to do the legwork of making the contact and getting themselves in. I'll give them the gatekeeper's name, but subsequent to that, they've got to make the connection, and they've got to go and represent themselves in the college. And I think that that's a great way of introducing them to that. So for example, then it goes back to my dad too. Like my father was like, yeah, I'm part of the fire department, but you still have to go through the process. You're not automatically a member of the fire department. I'll tell you who to go to, who's the recruiter, and they'll know you're coming, but you're on your own, buddy. And I think that that's an important skill set to have, is how do you identify a civic engagement opportunity? What does that look like? And then how do you promote yourself? And then subsequently connect with that, civically involved community, agency, institution, whatever it is. And how do you get your foot in the door? And what does that look like? And building the confidence to say, here's what I have to offer. I think that that's important as well.
Well, thank you, Dale. And thank you so much for your time this evening and your presentation. And we're really excited that there were so many participating in the second Front Row with the Faculty program. The next program is scheduled for December 9th. Sister Michelle Aronica will be presenting. Her topic is A Christmas Calling. So I think that will be a very interesting time of year, of course, the 9th of December, and we'll all be in that mode. And I look forward to seeing you all there. Please register. And thank you again for your participation, all of you. And thank you, Dale, for your time tonight.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everyone.